My name is Nadine, and I was 39 years old when I stood in my future mother-in-law's kitchen with a dish towel in my hands and heard my fiancé explain to his sister exactly what I was for. The house was one of those old brick colonials in Bexley with the original return air vent in the kitchen ceiling, the kind that carries every word from the sitting room above. Like the house is telling on itself. I was drying a serving bowl. The cobbler was still warm on the counter, and Curtis, 46 years old, the man I had loved for 3 years, and been engaged to for 1, said to Cherie, "She's not a wife, she's a line of credit." Then he said something about my age. Then he said the word grateful, and he stretched it out, the way you'd say it about a dog at the shelter, and Cherie laughed. Not a small laugh. A full one, from the chest, the laugh of a woman who has heard the joke before and still finds it funny. I stood there with that dish towel wrapped around my knuckles, and I did not drop the bowl. I want you to understand that. I set the bowl down on the drying rack, rim to rim with the others, and I finished the towel, and I folded it in thirds and hung it over the oven handle the way his mother liked it. What Curtis didn't know is that I don't panic. I document. He thought he had 3 years of a woman who loved him. What he actually had was 3 years of a woman who audits things for a living and who had just been handed the first irregularity. Before I get into it, tell me in the comments where you're watching from today. And if this is the kind of story that finds you where you live, subscribe, because the one I'm telling tomorrow costs somebody more than money. Let me tell you something about the dress I was wearing that night, because I want you to see her, the woman in that kitchen. Deep green 3/4 sleeves, a hem that hit right below the knee. I bought it at a department store on the north side using a coupon I'd been saving in my wallet for 6 weeks. Curtis had said it made me look like somebody's first lady, and I'd carried that compliment around for a month like a stone in my pocket, taking it out, turning it over, deciding it was warm. I was somebody's first lady. Just not the way he meant it. I'm a senior internal auditor. Have been for 11 years. I work for a county school district. 41 buildings, a $310 million operating budget, and about 400 people who all sincerely believe their own department is the one that's underfunded. My whole job is looking at a spreadsheet somebody swears is fine and finding the one line that isn't. I've caught a transportation supervisor moving fuel money. I've caught a food service director with a nephew on the vendor list. I've never once raised my voice doing it. I write it down, I attach the documentation, I let the paper talk. 3 years earlier, I turned down a job in Denver, director of audit services for a hospital system. It came with $40,000 more a year and a corner window, and the kind of title that closes a career out clean. I turned it down 11 days after Curtis said he could see a life with me, and I told everybody I turned it down for love. I've had time to think about that. I don't believe I turned it down for love. I believe I turned it down because I was 36, and I had watched every woman in my family grow into her own furniture, and the thought of doing 40 by myself in a city where nobody knew my name made something in my chest go tight and stupid. My mother used to say, "Nadine, you build a house for people before they've shown you a shovel." She'd say it on Sunday mornings in that little kitchen on Hawthorne Avenue, gospel station low on the windowsill radio, cornbread going in the cast iron skillet she'd had since before I was born. She never once looked at me when she said it. She'd just say it toward the stove, like the stove needed to hear it too. I thought she was hard. I thought love was supposed to be a shovel and a house. She died when I was 31, and I have spent every year since trying to remember which of the things she told me were bitterness and which were sight. Now, Curtis Vaughn. I need to say his whole name because I don't want anybody confused about who I'm describing. Curtis was the executive director of a nonprofit called Cornerstone Fellowship Ministries, which had been formed to build a fellowship hall. A real one, brick and stilton, gymnasium in the back, commercial kitchen. A room for the after-school program. His father had been a pastor. He carried that the way some men carry a badge. He prayed before meals with his hand over yours. He remembered the names of your coworkers. The names of your coworkers. When he asked how your day was, he waited for the answer, and he didn't check his phone while you gave it. Do you know how rare that is? Do you know what a woman will overlook for a man who waits for the answer? People are going to ask me why. They already have. Why did you move into his house? Why did you put money into an account with a man you weren't married to? Why did you sign what he put in front of you? So let me answer it plain, because nobody ever answers it plain. When a man prays over your food, asking him for paperwork feels like accusing him of something. When his mother calls you daughter before the wedding, asking to see the deed feels like spitting. When the whole congregation stands up and claps for the two of you at the anniversary service, requesting a copy of the loan agreement feels like you're the one with the character problem. That is not an accident. That is the whole architecture. Men like Curtis don't hide behind lies. They hide behind other people's manners. So, the vent. It was a Saturday in October. Curtis's mother, Miss Loretta, 69, house shoes and reading glasses and the sharpest tongue in 3 counties when she wanted it, had hosted a small dinner. 9 of us. His sister Cherie, 51, who was the treasurer of Cornerstone and had never in 3 years asked me a single question about myself. 2 deacons. Miss Loretta's sister. Me. The dinner was fine. The dinner was actually lovely. Curtis said grace with his hand over mine and thanked God for the woman who had made his life make sense, and Miss Loretta got a little wet in the eyes, and Cherie looked at her plate. Afterward, the men went up to the sitting room, and the women scattered, and I did what I always did, which was clear the table and start the dishes. Because and I liked being useful, and because, if I'm honest, I liked being seen being useful. Miss Loretta went to lie down. Cherie went upstairs to Curtis. And that vent, that ugly brass grate in the ceiling that his mother had been meaning to have painted since 1994, brought them both down to me like they were standing at my elbow. Cherie said, "You really going through with it?" And Curtis laughed a little. Comfortable. The way you laugh in your mother's house. He said I was not a wife. He said I was a line of credit. He said 39 and no children and perfect attendance, and she'll be grateful the rest of her life. He said something about how I'd signed the guarantee without reading past the first page, and how there was a certain kind of woman who confuses being needed with being loved, and if you find one, you don't let her go, you renew her. And Cherie laughed. I remember my hands more than my heart. My hands kept going. Rinse, rack, rinse, rack. I got to the bottom of the sink, and there was nothing left, so I picked up the dish towel and dried what didn't need drying. Then I heard Curtis say, "Come on down, they'll wonder," and I heard the floor creak. And I had about 11 seconds. I took the cobbler out of the warmer and cut it into 9 squares. I carried it out to the dining room, and I set a plate in front of Cherie first, because she was closest, and I said, "You want ice cream with that, honey?" And she said yes, and I got her the ice cream. For the next 2 hours, I laughed at the right places. I let Curtis put his arm across the back of my chair. I told Miss Loretta the cobbler was her recipe and I'd only added a little lemon zest. And she said, "That's why," and everybody laughed. When Deacon Reeves asked when the wedding was, I said May, and I squeezed Curtis's hand. Cherie looked at me once. Just once across the table, and something crossed her face and left again. At the time I couldn't name it. I can now. It was the cheap kind of discomfort, not guilt. Guilt costs you something. This was just the mild indigestion of a woman watching a joke get closer to a person. We drove home. Curtis talked about the fellowship hall the whole way, the steel prices, the framing schedule. He turned into the driveway of the house on Kensington that I had been living in for 2 years and had never once seen a piece of paper about, and he put the car in park and said, "You were good tonight." Good. Like I'd been a presentation. He went up to shower. I said I wanted to sit outside a minute. I sat in my car in the driveway of a house that wasn't mine, and I did not cry. Let me tell you something about the difference between hurt and cold. Hurt sits in your chest and wants a witness. Cold gets down into your hands and starts sorting. I called Ophelia Grant. Ophelia has been my oldest friend since I was 24 and she was 57. And we sat next to each other on a church bus to Cincinnati. She spent 34 years as a loan officer at a credit union. She has watched more people sign their names to things than a notary at a hospital. She's 72 now. She answers the phone on the second ring or not at all. She picked up. She said, "It's late," I told her. "Start to finish. No crying, no editorializing, just the sentences in the order they came through the ceiling. The line of credit, the grateful, the renew." She didn't interrupt. That's the thing about Ophelia. She lets you finish the whole ugly thing and doesn't reach for you until you set it down. When I was done, she was quiet for maybe 4 seconds. Then she asked me 2 questions. "Is your name on the deed to that house?" My hands were on the steering wheel. I said he'd told me we'd handle it after the wedding, that the attorney who did his father's estate was going to redo everything at once. She said. Nothing in her voice at all. Then, Nadine. "Did you sign anything for that building fund?" And the driveway went very quiet, because I had. 14 months earlier, in the church office on a Tuesday, with a bulletin on the desk and Cherie standing by the door holding her keys. The credit union had needed something extra, Curtis said, because the ministry was young and didn't have a lending history. A formality. "Everybody's uncle does this," he said. "My father did it twice, a personal guarantee. On a construction loan, $180,000. I signed it in blue ink, and Cherie witnessed it, and we went to lunch afterward, and I had a chicken salad, and I remember being proud. I told Ophelia the number. She let out a breath, slow, the way you do, when you don't want the other person to hear that you're afraid for them. Don't move anything," she said. "Don't say a word to that man. Don't cry in front of him, and don't get quiet in front of him either, because quiet is a change and he'll notice a change. You go in that house and you be exactly who you were yesterday. And Nadine, pull your credit report tonight. Not tomorrow. Tonight." I went inside. I moved through that dark house without turning on a single light. I got into bed next to Curtis, and he rolled over and put his arm across my waist, heavy and warm, and he was asleep in 90 seconds like a man who had never in his life had a reason to lie awake. I stared at the ceiling until the window went gray. He thinks I'll never leave, I thought. Let him keep thinking it. That's the last free thing he gets from me. He was out of the house by 7:15. Framing inspection. I made coffee. I got my laptop, mine, not his, and I went to annualcreditreport.com, which is free, which is the government-mandated site, which is the one you use, not the ones with the singing commercials. I want to be very clear about what happened next, because if nothing else in this story is useful to you, this will be. There it was. Reporting on my credit. A $180,000 installment obligation from Heritage Point Credit Union, and underneath it, an auto loan for $28,500 on a vehicle I did not drive, had never driven, and had assumed. The way you assume the sun was his. I had co-signed it in a parking lot. He'd said the dealer needed one more signature because his business income was hard to document. It had taken 40 seconds. It was raining. I sat at that counter for a while, then opened a new spreadsheet. Cornerstone Fellowship Ministries was a 501c3, which means, and please write this down, its tax return is a public document. Anybody can read it. You go to the IRS nonprofit search, or you go to one of the free databases, and you type the name and you read the Form 990 of the organization your fiancé runs, and nobody has to give you permission, and nobody ever has to know you did it. The 990 took me 11 minutes to find, and about 40 seconds to understand. Total revenue, $214,000. Contributions from a congregation of maybe 300 people, most of whom I had personally hugged. Compensation, Curtis Vaughn, Executive Director, $88,000. Compensation, Cherie Vaughn, Treasurer and Administrator, $46,000. And on Schedule O, in the section where you disclose payments to related parties, a line item for consulting and project management services rendered by an entity called Cornerstone Stewardship Group, LLC. I had never heard that name in my life, so I went to the Secretary of State's business search, which is also free, which is also public, and I typed it in. Cornerstone Stewardship Group, LLC, registered 15 months earlier. Statutory agent, Cherie Vaughn, 15 months. Curtis proposed to me 16 months earlier on a Friday in the parking lot of the Arboretum because it started raining before we got to the bench. I got out a legal pad. I wrote the LLC registration date. I wrote the date of the proposal. And I drew a line between them and put the number in the middle. 9 days. He proposed to me on a Friday. 9 days later, he and his sister formed a company to bill his own charity. I did not scream. I made a second cup of coffee, and I went to work, and I ran a scoping meeting for the transportation audit. And I asked good questions, and at 11:40 I stood in the third-floor bathroom of the district administration building with my hands on either side of the sink, and I looked at my own face for about 15 seconds. You want to know what I saw? I saw a woman who had turned down Denver. Then I washed my hands and I went to lunch. That night I logged into the joint account, the one we opened for the wedding, the one I fed every other Friday like a parking meter, $600 a pay period for 19 months, plus the $4,000 I dropped in from my tax refund, plus the $1,100 from the sale of my mother's dining set, which I have not forgiven myself for and probably won't. It should have held about $19,400. It held transfers over $500. 5 transfers over 5 months. Different amounts. Same first week of every month, regular as a mortgage. Same destination. Cornerstone Stewardship Group, LLC. $7,900. I screenshotted every transaction, every date, every amount, every last 4 digits of the receiving account. I emailed them to my personal address with the subject line documentation. Joint Exact, because that's what I'd have named it at work, and my hands don't know how to do anything else. Then I searched my own files, every folder, every drawer, the fireproof box under my side of the bed. My name did not appear on the deed to the house on Kensington, not the mortgage, not the homeowner's policy, not the water bill. 2 years, my couch in his living room, my mother's skillet in his cabinet. On paper, I was a guest with excellent references. I called Ophelia and read her the numbers straight off the screen. Flat, she 'cause numbers a long time. Then she said, "That money didn't vanish, baby. It went somewhere with a name on it. Now we go get the name. I've got the name. Then we go find out who else it's been." I didn't understand her yet. I would. Curtis came home that night with a bag of drywall screws and a story about the inspector. I asked him how the framing looked. I refilled his water glass. He told me his name had come up for a seat on the state coalition board, the faith-based housing people, the ones with the grant pipeline, and there'd be a character review, and he said the words character review the way another man would say dessert. I said, "That's wonderful, Curtis." He said, "You're already helping." Reeves told them we were engaged, said it showed stability. I let that sit exactly where he put it. I carried the plates to the sink and turned on the water and stood with my back to him, and something in me turned all the way over, like a deadbolt going home. His future depended on how he looked. How he looked depended on me. He had built me a room and put me in it, and he'd forgotten that a woman standing in a room can also see the door. 2 Saturdays later, I drove out to my Aunt Bernice's place, 40 minutes east, where the trees are old and people still edge their lawns. 68 years old, my mother's baby sister, the last person alive who remembers me before I was reasonable. I brought sweet potato pie from the bakery on Livingston, and I didn't say anything for the first 20 minutes. We sat at her table. The kettle went. Then I asked her what she'd thought of Curtis the very first time. Not what she'd said, what she'd thought. Aunt Bernice took her time. She poured. She sat down across from me and she looked at me the way she used to when I was 13, and asking questions I already knew the answers to. She said, "I thought he was awful good at making a person feel chosen, and I thought that was the thing to keep an eye on." I waited. She turned her cup around twice. "There's something I've been carrying," she said, "and I've been carrying it a long time, and I've been asking the Lord about it, and I don't think he wants it anymore." A few months before that man asked you to marry him, he called me. Wanted to take me to lunch. Said he wanted to make sure he could give you the kind of life you deserved. My jaw locked. He asked me about your mother's house on Hawthorne. Whether it had gone to you free and clear, or whether there was still a note on it. He asked it real gentle, framed it like he was making a plan. She looked out the window. I told him your mother's affairs were settled and modest, and not a thing I'd be discussing. And he smiled and paid for the lunch and never brought it up again. And I said nothing to you. Her voice went thin. Because you were happy, and I didn't have anything but a feeling, and I have watched too many women in this family get talked out of a feeling. She got up. She went to the drawer with the photographs she'd never gotten around to sorting, and she came back and put one on the table between us. My mother. Maybe 45. Standing in somebody's yard in a yellow dress, head tipped back, laughing at something outside the frame. The light all over her. Aunt Bernice said, Vera always told me, a man shows you who he is the day he stops trying to impress you. And I'll tell you the truth, Nadine. Curtis never started. I looked at my mother's face a long time. She would have known in a week. I know she would have. I'm sorry I waited, my aunt said. You told me now, I said, and that was all either of us needed. But here's the part that nearly took me down. Because I understood, finally, why he proposed. There was no inheritance. My mother's house had a note on it, and the note ate the equity, and I sold it at a loss and cried in the parking lot of the title company. He proposed because he thought there was money. Then he found out there wasn't. And he stayed. Because a woman with no inheritance and a steady salary and a credit score of 810 is worth more to a man like Curtis than any inheritance ever could be. She's not an asset. She's a facility. You don't spend a facility. You draw on it. You renew it. I made it to the Kroger parking lot on Main before it got me. I sat in the car and I cried for about 20 seconds. Ugly and short, hands over my face. The kind of crying that sounds like a cough. A woman pushing a cart looked at me and looked away, and I don't blame her. Then I opened the glove box and got out the legal pad, and I wrote down the date of the lunch he'd had with my aunt. That's it. That's the whole thing I did with my grief. I gave it a date. Now let me tell you about the calendar. I'd seen it weeks before and hadn't understood it. Curtis kept a paper planner, which everybody found charming, and it lived on the kitchen desk. And on the Tuesday page, and the Tuesday before that, and every Tuesday going back 4 months, at 12 o'clock he'd written 2 initials. TB. I decided it was a woman. Of course I did. That's where your mind goes, and I want to be honest about how ordinary I was in that moment. I took a half day. I told my assistant I had an appointment, which was true. I parked across from a diner on the east side at 11:40 with a sandwich in a paper bag and a cup of coffee I didn't drink. At 12:04 his car pulled in. At 12:09 she came around the corner. And she was not young. She was maybe mid-50s. Scrub top under an open jacket, work shoes, her purse strap doubled over her shoulder the way you carry it when you've been robbed once. She did not smile when she saw him. She stopped about 4 feet away, and he said something, and she nodded. And they went inside separately, him first. They were in there 22 minutes. When they came out, he handed her a white envelope. She put it in her purse without looking in it. She didn't say goodbye. She walked to a Corolla with a cracked bumper and sat in it for a full minute before she started it. I got one photograph. Then I put the phone in my bag and drove back to work and approved a staffing reallocation and sat through an hour of budget variance and said 3 intelligent things. That night, I looked her up. Trina Boyd. And it took me about 2 hours. And it did not take a private investigator. And it did not take money. It took the county clerk's public docket search, which is free, and which anybody watching this can use tonight. Heritage Point Credit Union v. Trina Boyd. Filed 6 years earlier. Judgment for the plaintiff, $61,400. Same credit union that held $180,000 with my name on it. I found her marriage license, too. Trina Boyd and Curtis Vaughn, 9 years married. Divorced 2 years before he met me. Nobody had ever mentioned an ex-wife to me. Not Cherie. Not Miss Loretta. Not a deacon, not a choir member, not one soul in 3 years. I called her on a Sunday afternoon. I said my name, and I said I was engaged to Curtis, and before I could get to the third sentence, she said, very quietly, "Oh, honey, we met at a coffee place near the hospital where she works nights." Trina Boyd is 54. She has good posture and tired eyes, and she stirred her coffee for a long time before she said anything. Then she said, "Did he tell you it was a formality?" I said yes. "Did his sister witness it?" I said yes. She nodded like a doctor confirming something on a chart. "The last one was a family life center," she said. "Different church, different county, beautiful renderings. I signed the guarantee because I was 38 and I loved him, and I thought a wife who wouldn't sign was a wife who didn't believe." She looked up at me. The building never got past the slab. The money went to a management company his sister ran. When the credit union came, it came for me. Not the church, not him, the guarantor. 6 years. $412 a month, garnished. She had picked up nights and she had lost the house on Waverly, and she had a daughter at Ohio State who thought her mother just liked working overnight. I asked her why he still saw her. Why the Tuesdays? Why the envelope? And she gave me the sentence that I will carry to the end of my life. He's not paying me because he feels bad. He's paying me because I'm still on the note. She wrapped both hands around her cup. $300, cash, when he has it. It's not guilt, Nadine. It's maintenance. Same as he does the gutters. Then she said the other thing. He didn't leave me for another woman. He left me for the next signature. I sat with that. I said, "Why didn't you warn anybody?" And she gave me a look I hope I never earn from another woman. "Warn who?" she said. "Y'all's church? His mother? Everybody in that building thinks I'm the bitter first wife who couldn't handle a man with a calling." She shrugged. "I've got a daughter. I've got a garnishment. I don't have a reputation to spend, baby." "You do." That's when I understood what Ophelia had meant. I didn't have a betrayal. I had a pattern. And a pattern has a shape, and a shape can be shown to people. Here's what I did next, because this is the part people get wrong. I did not confront him. I did not confront him. I did not post anything. I did not tell one single person at that church. I met Ophelia at a diner halfway between us with a folder. We spread it across the table between the coffee cups. The time-stamped screenshots of the transfers. The Secretary of State printout with Cherie's name as statutory agent. The 990 with the compensation lines highlighted, the credit report with my name and $180,000 sitting on it like a tumor. The docket sheet on Trina, the 9 days between the proposal and the LLC. Ophelia had written me a demand letter, $7,900. Every transfer, every date, the account agreement, the statute. She slid it across. She said, "Now, small claims in this state caps out at $6,000, so this doesn't go there. This goes to the Municipal Courts Civil Division, and you'll want a real attorney for the guarantee piece anyway. Because that's a separate animal and it's the one that can eat you." She tapped the letter. But a certified letter, return receipt requested, arriving at the right hour. Men like Curtis don't fear a courtroom. They fear the envelope, because the envelope means somebody knows. I read it twice. Then I said, "Hold it." Ophelia looked at me over the rim of her cup and did not ask why. Because Curtis had a character review in 3 weeks, and the fellowship hall had a dedication service scheduled, the slab, the coalition board people there to see it. And he had gotten around to organize to see it. And nobody had gotten around to organizing it. I said, "Let me handle the dedication." Curtis was thrilled. He said, "That's why I'm marrying you." I sent the invitations. I ordered the programs from a print shop on Broad, and I picked the paper myself, a heavy cream stock, because I wanted them to have some weight in a person's hand. I confirmed Deacon Reeves. I confirmed Miss Loretta. I confirmed the 2 men from the state coalition who were doing the character review. And I called Heritage Point Credit Union, and I spoke very politely to the commercial offer whose name was on the loan file, a Mr. Dunn, and I said that as a guarantor on the cornerstone note I would be honored if he'd attend the dedication of the building his institution had financed. He said he'd be delighted. He said not enough people invite the bank. I confirmed Ophelia. I confirmed Aunt Bernice. I did not invite Trina. I called her and told her the date, and I said, "You don't owe this room anything," and she said, "No, I don't," and she thanked me for asking instead of using her. The night before, Curtis got in bed and set his phone down and lay there in the dark. Then he reached over and found my hand. "I'm a blessed man," he said, "and here's the thing that still gets me." He meant it. He wasn't gloating. He wasn't running a scheme in his head. He was a man lying in the dark next to a facility that had performed for 3 years, exactly as designed, and he was grateful to God for it, sincerely, from the bottom of whatever he had instead of a heart. I said nothing. I turned off the lamp. And in the dark, for the first time since a dish towel and a brass vent, I smiled. The fellowship hall smelled like cut lumber and cold concrete. 40-some people on folding chairs, plywood over the trenches, a table up front with the architect's rendering propped on an easel and a pair of scissors on a ribbon. Nobody was going to cut for another 8 months. Curtis was radiant. He shook Mr. Dunn's hand with both of his. He remembered the name of Deacon Reeves's grandbaby. He touched Cherie's shoulder as he passed her, and she's looked at her program. He spoke for 11 minutes. He talked about his father. He talked about stewardship. He said the word "our" about 40 times, and it did a lot of work. Then he looked at me and he said, "And I want to bring up the woman who put this whole day together. The steadiest woman I know." The room clapped. I stood up. I smoothed my skirt. I walked to the front and I set my folder on the table, next to the rendering. I said, "Thank you. I do a certain kind of work for a living, and I'd like to share some of it with you all today." And then I read. I read the loan number. I read the date of my personal guarantee and the amount, $180,000. I read the auto loan. I read the name Cornerstone Stewardship Group LLC. I read the registration date. I read the name of the statutory agent, and I said it clearly enough that nobody had to lean in. Cherie Vaughn. And I read the date Curtis proposed to me, and I said the number 9. I read the compensation figures off the Form 990, both of them, and I said, "This document is public. Every one of you can pull it up on your phone before you leave this building. I read the 5 transfers out of the wedding account. The dates, the amounts, the total. The room had gone so quiet I could hear the plywood settle. I turned to Mr. Dunn from the credit union and I said, "Sir, you may want to pull the collateral file on this note, and you may want to look at a judgment your institution obtained 6 years ago in this county against a woman named Trina Boyd." He was already writing. I turned to the 2 men from the coalition. I said, "You gentlemen came here to evaluate character. I've saved you a trip." Then I turned to Cherie. She was looking at me. She had stopped pretending to read the program. I said, "You laughed. That's all." I didn't need more. I reached up and took off my ring. I did not throw it. I set it down flat on the table, next to the rendering of a building that was never going to have a gymnasium in it, the way you set down a pen when you've finished signing something, and the business is concluded. I picked up my folder. I looked at Curtis. Really looked at him, probably for the last time, and there was nothing in his face at all. Not shame. Just a man watching an instrument fail. And I said it. "I am not your collateral." I walked down that center aisle and out through the doorway that didn't have a door in it yet, and behind me nobody said a word. Aunt Bernice caught up with me in the parking lot. She didn't say anything either. She just took the folder out of my hands and carried it to the car, which is, I think, the single most loving thing anybody has ever done for me. The weeks after were fast in some places and unbearably slow in others. The coalition withdrew his name in 9 days. The letter used the phrase concerns regarding financial governance. Bloodless. Permanent. The church board voted to commission an independent audit, and the funny thing is, that's my whole profession, and I had nothing to do with it. I didn't have to. I told the truth in a room with the right people in it, and the room did what rooms do. Nobody had to lie. That's the part I keep coming back to. I never once had to lie. Cherie resigned as treasurer within the month. She sent me a text that said you didn't have to do it like that, and I did not respond, because she was right and it didn't matter. Curtis called 23 times in 11 days. Then he called Aunt Bernice. She let it ring. Then he called and offered me $4,000 in good faith to put this behind us, and he said the words, "You know I never meant that," and it was the first time in 3 years I heard him sound like a man in a hurry. Ophelia mailed the letter. Certified, return receipt requested. He paid the full $7,900 in 22 days. Wire confirmation, no note, no explanation. It landed on a Thursday while I was eating a salad at my desk, and I set my fork down and said a quiet thank you to the woman who screenshotted every transaction instead of crying about them. The guarantee took longer. That's the honest part, and I'm not going to make it sound clean, because somebody watching this is on a note right now, and I don't want to lie to her. It took a lawyer. It took 4 months. It took the church board voting to reconstitute the loan with the congregation's trustees as guarantors, because they wanted their building more than they wanted Curtis. And Mr. Dunn at the credit union, who I want to say behaved better than anybody in this story, signed a release of guarantee and mailed me a copy. I read it in the driveway. $180,000 gone off my back in 11 lines of type. The auto loan he refinanced in 31 days, once I told him what my next letter would be about. And I gave Trina everything. The LLC filings, the 990, the transfer records, all of it, in a manila envelope on her kitchen table. I told her it was hers to do whatever she wanted with, including nothing. She filed a complaint with the State Attorney General's Charitable Law Section. She did that herself. I didn't ask her to, and I didn't help her write it. 6 weeks later, she called me and said, "They opened a file." And then she said, "I've been paying $412 a month for 6 years, and I never once thought anybody would even read my name." I said, "They're reading it now. We were both quiet a long time on that phone. I moved into a furnished apartment on the third floor of a building I picked myself, in a neighborhood I researched for 2 weeks, and I signed a lease with one name on it and paid the deposit out of an account that had never had anybody else's name on it in its life. 14 months later, Charleston. I chose this city the way I should have chosen everything before it. Alone, on purpose, with nobody else's preferences factored in. I studied the health system's audit function for 2 months before I ever sent an email. I knew their gaps. When they offered, I negotiated. Calmly, with documentation, because that's how Ophelia taught me to do everything that matters. I walked out of that call as a senior audit manager, making more money than I have ever made. I signed on a Wednesday afternoon in a parking garage, and I didn't tell a single soul until it was done. Let me tell you something. There's a specific kind of quiet that lives inside a decision nobody talked you into. I'd never heard it before. It's the best sound there is. My apartment is on the 4th floor. 3 windows in the living room. My name on the lease, the way it should always have been. Over the bed, there's a print I found at a Saturday market. All warm ochres and no subject at all. Completely impractical, and I bought it because something in my chest moved when I looked at it. That was reason enough. It was the first thing I ever bought purely because it made me happy, and I'm not embarrassed that it took me until 40. Sunday mornings I wake up slow. I make cornbread in my mother's cast iron skillet, which I went and got out of Curtis's cabinet on a Tuesday afternoon while he was at a framing inspection, and which is the only thing I took from that house. The gospel station comes out of a little speaker on the windowsill because that's where a radio belongs. Aunt Bernice calls every Sunday. The calls are shorter now, 15-20 minutes. Her tomatoes, my new director, what she made Friday. Do you know what short, easy phone calls mean between 2 people who went through something together? They mean it's over. They mean we're just living now, and living is enough to talk about. Ophelia drives down every couple of months, and we order too much, and we talk too loud, and if anyone has ever asked us to lower our voices, neither of us heard it. She looks at me across the table sometimes with a small, satisfied expression, like a woman crossing something off a list she started a long time ago. Trina and I texted. Her daughter graduated. She sent me a picture of the cap. People ask me the question all the time now. They send it in messages. They ask it in the grocery line when they recognize my voice. How do you ever trust a man again? And I've thought about it, and I don't think that's the question. I don't need to learn to trust men. I need to trust myself, and that's the thing he actually took. Not the money. The money came back. What he took was my ability to believe my own eyes. Here's how I knew I had it back. Last spring, a landlord in Mount Pleasant showed me a unit with a view of the water and a rent that was $400 under market, and he was charming, and he waited for the answer when he asked how my day was, and on page 6 of the lease there was a clause obligating the tenant to pay for HVAC replacement. I closed the folder. I said no thank you. I did not apologize, and I did not explain, and I did not lie awake that night wondering if I'd been too suspicious. That's it. That's the whole recovery. It's not a wedding. It's a Tuesday and a page 6. I went on 2 dates this past year, not because I was ready. I'm not convinced ready is a real thing, or maybe it's just something you only recognize looking backward. I went because I could. Neither one went anywhere, and I wasn't disappointed, and that not being disappointed is not a small thing. I spent a decade mistaking anxiety for love because the waiting and the wondering and the checking felt so much like caring. What I had with Curtis never felt safe. It felt urgent. I know the difference now. 2 Saturdays ago, I closed out the storage unit I'd been paying on for 16 months. The last thread. Most of it had already been sorted and donated in stages, and what was left fit in the back of the car. At the bottom of the last box, folded flat inside a Ziploc bag, was a dish towel. I don't remember putting it there. I've thought about it, and I truly don't. Some part of me packed it and sealed it and carried it 400 miles, and never once mentioned it to anybody, not even to Ophelia. I stood in the concrete corridor of that storage facility and held it in both hands. And I didn't think about Curtis at all. I thought about the woman at that sink. How she rinsed the last bowl, how she folded this towel in thirds and hung it on the oven handle exactly the way somebody else liked it, how she cut 9 squares of cobbler and carried them out and got Cherie her ice cream. Everybody thinks that woman was weak. She wasn't weak. She was counting. She knew the moment hadn't come yet, so she waited for it, and she waited a long time, and she waited pleasantly, which is the hardest way to wait there is. I brought the towel home. I washed it. I folded it in thirds. Sunday morning, I turned on the gospel station my mother played, and I put the skillet on the burner, and I hung that towel on my own oven handle in my own kitchen in a city I picked myself, and I made breakfast for one person, and I sat down at my own table and ate it slow. It was enough. Lord, it was finally more than enough.